Project Management Insights, providing project managers with professional development in the interpersonal skills areas of leadership, team building, and communication.
Okay, so here we are for this second podcast for the week. And yes, it's a bit late because, again, I've been trying to get myself well enough so I don't sound too nasally for you, and which means you have difficulty understanding me. So hopefully that's not the case and you will be able to track with me in today's episode. Today I want to talk about how people listen. It's one of those strange things that I hadn't really thought about. I know I've spoken to you before about how people learn and their learning styles, and I guess this is just another one of those added dimensions that came up today again when I was reading a book all about communication and communication styles. And it's about how you listen, and the author of the article talks about listening in a way that suits your particular mental wiring. And he says this can make a significant difference in how much of a conversation or meeting you comprehend and retain. And what I found interesting was it wasn't until I read it that I started to begin to think about the way that I take in information and how I listen. So maybe as you are listening to what I'm about to say, you might like to consider for yourself the way that you listen, how you take in information. And he talks about the way that individuals process auditory information differently. He says there's a spectrum of processing styles running from the strongly linear to the strongly associative. Linear listeners take in material as it's presented, effortlessly following the speaker from point A to point B, whereas associative listeners are wired differently. They tend to connect the ideas presented to things they already know. Though they don't tend to follow the speaker step by step, they are nonetheless able to comprehend the material. I found this interesting because when I thought about most of what I do, I think I'm following along with the person from point A to B, and yet in certain circumstances I also find myself connecting the ideas with, I guess, what my own experience is a lot of the time, or information that I have. And so I'm also in that moment an associative listener. So what do you notice about the way you listen? Do you tend to follow along from A to B, or do you take the information and connect the ideas? And how might this change the way that you present information or the way that you interact with someone if you understand the difference in the way that they listen or take in information? And so he says the truly linear types are capable of listening passively. They don't need to take any special measures to enhance their listening, for it comes naturally. It's like the strong auditory processes sit and focus. So these are the quiet ones, the ones that sit there and are taking things in, they're following along, they're getting the information, they are tracking from A to B, and then they might speak up, is my tracking of what happens. He says their faces are like radar screens. They're drinking in your every word. And you've seen these people in meetings, I'm sure. I know I have. They sit there and it appears as if they're sort of, it's like so focused that they're not present. That's my words, because they're not engaging, they're not not seeming to take in the information, and yet what I'm now noticing is the exact opposite is true. They're probably listening to the extent of really taking the information in rather than manipulating the information necessarily. Then he says that by contrast, many associative types aren't effective listeners when they're this passive. They must do something. If they're text-oriented, they may increase their attentiveness by taking notes. Now, this absolutely fascinates me because in one of my workplaces, there was a lady who would sit in a meeting creating these very, very detailed drawings of dragons and witches and all sorts of absolutely weird things. And yet, when I would get out of the meeting and talk to her about something that was said, she could come back with the quote of what the person said word for word. How on earth she did it, in my mind, when she was sitting there drawing, which appeared to be so far away from what I would consider as focus on the topic and what was going on, amazed me. And yet it was true that when she was drawing and working with her hands, doing something in a physical sense, pen on paper, at the same time as listening to someone, she was taking in the information at a deeper level. Have you tried this? I mean, if you're one of these associative listeners, have you tried scribbling, squiggling, drawing, doing those, and I forget the name of them, the drawings with the little shapes? Have you thought about naturally doodling while you're in a meeting, taking in the information? Maybe it's something that you want to try yourself because you might find that you take in more of the information. And or if you notice someone scribbling, taking notes, or what seems like scribbling and doodling, maybe, just maybe, that's a positive thing because what they're doing is actually working their mind in a way that has them listening at a deeper level to what it is that you're saying. So don't look at them, as I would, and consider that they're not paying attention, that they're wasting time, that they're doodling, and they shouldn't be. I have a huge story about that because I've had people like that in my meetings and it's really irritated me. I've been really, really angry and upset that the person has, as far as I'm concerned, not paid attention. And yet, from what this gentleman is saying, the exact opposite is true. So it mentions that others listen better if they can restate what they've heard, or they may do better by asking probing questions. Well, absolutely. I mean, there are certain times when I feel that it works better for me if I'm able to play back what I've heard you say. And that's for me to check in and make sure that I've taken in exactly what it is that you're messaging, where your messaging's at, what it is that you want me to get, what the key points are. And so I might come back and verbalize that back to you just to make sure I've captured it correctly. Or I might ask questions about it. I'm curious, I'm interested, I'm wanting to know more, so I might ask you questions. And those questions might be probing, and you might feel really uncomfortable because I'm asking you probing questions. And yet, here we are hearing that this is a person that is listening. They're taking things in, they're really engaged with what you're saying, and it's their way of finding out more, being more engaged, being more interactive with what's happening. So don't assume that because people appear distracted or they're asking probing questions or they're playing material back to you, that they're stupid, uninterested, not connected with what you're saying. It might be that the exact opposite is happening and that they are really listening, and this is their listening style. They're associative listeners, which means they need to be able to connect the dots, for their own experience, and in order to do that, this is the best way for them to do that. So maybe next time you're in a meeting, just begin to pay attention to the sorts of things that occur with the people in the meeting. Are you noticing the scribbling? Do you notice that there are people that are sitting there very, very quietly and appear not to be taking things in? And yet, when it comes down to it, they are able to interact with you in a way. They are able to come back with those questions to show that they have been listening and they want more information, or that they have connected the dots and therefore have an example of a response or a solution because of the way that they've taken in, what's happening. So be aware that there are these different learning styles. Not everybody's the same, and work with the people to support whatever their listening style is. And if you notice someone that's struggling to be paying attention or struggling to listen, ask them about what happens for them and the way that they put the information together. And if they happen to be one of these people that needs the the track with you, and yet they don't seem to be able to focus, you might suggest to them that they doodle or take notes, write down words, whatever it is. Be physical at the same time as hearing you. And it was interesting because there was an example used in the book where a gentleman felt that he could not sit down and listen. He needed to stand up. He needed to be up and physically able to move his body in order to be able to listen in a way that had him take things in fully. So just know that everyone is different in the way that they listen. How do you listen? What's the best way for you to listen? And sometimes do you feel uncomfortable because you can't listen in a way that is best for you? Well, be aware of that when you're working with your team members. Know that everyone's individual, they all take in things differently, and there might be different ways for you to be able to share the information with them that has them listening in the best possible way and able to take the information in. Hope this has been a benefit, and I look forward to talking to you next time on the next episode of Project Management Insights.
Thank you for listening to this Project Management Insights podcast. Be sure to visit projectmanagementinsight.com and sign up for our monthly newsletter or to receive updates on upcoming training.